Yeah, we're good. So we are between you and dinner. So there's a lot of content for us to cover in this session, so we're going to go through it at a rate of knots. But if there's any questions, feel free to jump in. But we are arranging at lunch, so we can go into more depth, better answers, hopefully, during lunch. So this session is just about co-managing. I don't know if you feel like you're just about managing with the rate of change in IT at the moment. Certainly how I feel. So we've come up with a really cool name for this session, just about co-managing. That's the level of humour you're going to get from this session.
It's terrible, Ben.
It is. So my name's Ben Whitmore. I've been in IT for 20 years. I currently work in local government and I look after the data centre and the infrastructure. Strong focus on Microsoft technology, so ConfigMgr is my bread and butter. And obviously moved into the Intune space as well, because that's a natural progression for us SCCM admins. And this is my good friend, Leon.
Thank you. We're friends, are we?
We are.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Leon Ashton-Leatherland. I'm an internal delivery consultant at Power On Platforms, having recently moved there. I am now working with ConfigMgr and Intune coolness on a daily basis. That's pretty much it about me. And in my spare time, I like to do a bit of fishing or camping. It's glorified camping, really. Fairly active on Twitter. I like to blog from time to time. Primarily, my blog is the content is based around Android device management with Intune at the moment, but hopefully going to reach out and be having more content shortly.
iOS is the way forward, Leon.
Boo. No, there will be some iOS content, absolutely.
So in this session, it's going to run through at a rate of knots, so I apologise in advance for that, but there's a lot of content. We're going to be talking about, turning our clicker on, what is co-management? And we're going to talk about the paths to co-management. There's two common paths to get to a co-managed state in your environment. We're going to be talking about one of those paths today, but we just haven't got time to cover them both.
Just to hold fire there, Ben, and something else on the first point as well. Not just what is co-management, but what is the value of co-management, I think, to add.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to skim over the prerequisites, because there are prerequisites for co-management. And as I said before, there's a couple of ways to get into a co-managed state, depending on whether you've got existing ConfigMgr clients that you want to take advantage of some of the workloads with an Intune. And the other path is if you've got your internet-based clients that are already enrolled into Intune, getting some of the value of installing the ConfigMgr onto those clients. We're not going to focus on that second pathway today because we feel that the more common scenario is you've got an existing ConfigMgr estate and you want to start moving some of those workloads into Intune.
If you want to discuss pathway 2 with us afterwards during lunch or at the end of the day, then we can have a chat.
Yep. So the first part of the session is going to be very much slidey, clicky. We'll get through that as quick as we can. And then we're going to go through some live demo labs that have been pre-recorded because we don't trust the demo gods. We're going to be looking at setting up hybrid Azure AD. Jerry just touched on that in his last session. We're also going to be looking at enabling code management. And then we're going to do a couple of demos, actually switching workloads from ConfigMan to Intune. And then a short piece at the end, we're going to be looking at how we monitor code management, different log files, and whatnot. So what is co-management? Leon?
Okay, so co-management is to concurrently manage a Windows 10 device with both the ConfigMgr and Microsoft Intune. So talking about doing something like this in the past, people would shudder. You're going to have two different agents conflicting, causing performance issues on the device. But one thing just to point out here, Intune has been specifically engineered to work with ConfigMgr in this scenario, not against it.
Yeah, defo. So code management is a thing, and it's a thing only with ConfigMgr and Intune. Other NDMs don't apply for code management. What's that called?
Coexistence.
Well done.
Absolutely. And just to expand on that a bit, Ben, in that scenario, coexistence scenario, as soon as the config manager client detects that a third-party EMM has taken over control of the device, it will disable all of the workloads, meaning that the EMM has full control of them workloads.
Yeah, spot on. So when we talk about workloads, we're talking about things that you may have traditionally done with ConfigMan, so configuration policies, like endpoint protection policies and email policies and certificates.
We'll cover more on that shortly.
Application installations, we're going to go through it briefly, but you know, the traditional configuration manager workloads, we're looking at shifting those across to Intune.
So just before we move on, Ben, there's quite a few immediate value points as well.
Yep.
As soon as you enable co-management without even flipping these workloads,
Yep.
if you just pop back a slide if you can. Marvellous. So first and foremost, conditional access based on device compliance. Modern provisioning with Windows Autopilot. That's probably my favourite feature that I've been testing and working with at the moment. And also centralised visibility of device health.
Yep, spot on. So even just by enabling co-management, we get some really cool features. We don't have to move workloads. We could just enable co-management. There'd be no fun in that. But we do get some immediate value just by enabling co-management. So this, if you've ever searched for co-management on the internet, this is probably a common diagram that you'd see. So what it's showing is you'd have your Windows 10 client, because nobody's got Windows 7 anymore. I have. I've got a few hundred left. So you'd have your Windows 10 device, and it would have the config manager agent installed, and it would look like this. So you'd have your config manager infrastructure with your admins connecting via the console. They'd be getting applications from Software Center. So this is kind of our more traditional config man, how it looks today. And on the same Windows 10 device, we have our Intune MDM agent installed. So this is how co-management looks. We've got both agents installed. They're working concurrently. That's the buzzword for co-management. In harmony is the way I like to put it. And the workloads can come from Intune, or they can come from Config Manager, or in some scenarios, they can come from both. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. On that point, Ben, so not all the workloads, as you say, are switched from Config Manager to Intune. And when we're talking about apps, it's quite important to understand that with the client apps workload, when the authority of that is switched over to Intune, you are then in that scenario able to install apps from Config Manager within Software Center and from Microsoft Intune via the company portal. Okay? If you switch the Office click-to-run workload to Intune, the authority then switches solely to Intune from Config Manager. So just an important point to note out. That's in that section on the slide.
Yeah, spot on. So today, the following workloads were available as of ConfigMan 1906. So co-management was a thing since 1710. In 1806, we saw a lot more features light up, some really cool functionality. But as Pete mentioned in the first session, there's some really cool stuff being chucked into 1906. So specifically for workloads, we're looking at, we can move compliance policies from ConfigMan to Intune. Windows update policies, and resource access policies. And again, these may be things like Wi-Fi profiles, Windows Hello for Business, certificate settings, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we have the endpoint protection workload. And that's policies for endpoint protection. Device configuration policies.
So these will be like your CIs.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as just mentioned, then Office click-to-run apps, so your Office 365 installers, etc.
Yep. And
the client apps workload. Yeah.
Really cool. It's still in pre-release, but we use it. It's cool. It's really, really cool workload to move across.
So just a word of note on a pre-release feature within Config Manager. I don't know if everyone's aware, but in order to be able to use a pre-release feature, it has to be enabled within the Config Manager site.
Yep. So we've mentioned this before, there's two pathways to code management. The one we're going to focus on today is we have an existing ConfigMan client. They're on Windows 10, 1709, and we want to move some of the workloads away from Configuration Manager into Intune because we want a bit of a dabble, because we know it's really cool, everything's in the cloud, and we want to move that way, so we want to start moving some of the workloads. Maybe blur the line a little bit between ConfigMan, the way you used to do things, and the way things are done in Intune.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember there, Ben, is we can pilot these workloads first.
Yep.
And as we'll come on to shortly, specifically within Config Manager 1906, this becomes a lot more easier and more value there.
Yep. And if you want to take this one, Leon, if you want to explain.
Yes, so absolutely. The other scenarios where you've got internet enrolled devices already. So you've got Azure AD joined Windows 10 devices. And then you want to install and bootstrap the Config Manager client to then bring those devices into a co-management state. Yep. There is indeed two subsets to this scenario. So it's where you've got the Azure AD joined device, but you can also, via the Active Directory connector, have a hybrid Azure AD joined device as well.
Yep, both valid. So prerequisites. So you're going to need some licensing. So you are going to need Azure AD Premium licenses, P1 or P2, and you're going to need Microsoft Intune licenses. Now you can get to that state by buying Azure AD Premium and Intune. You can get to that state by buying EMS licenses as well, which is the more common method. If you're in an enterprise environment today and you're still using an enterprise subscription for your licenses, there are other things you can do. You can look at EMS add-ons. So maybe you're not quite ready to do a full investment into EMS for all of your clients and you want to dip your toe in it. The add-on is still a valid license option as well.
So ultimately, we're going to need to have an Azure Active Directory subscription. Devices must be either Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined. Yep. Also, Ben, I don't know if you'd like to explain the identity options that are available.
Yes.
Within that?
Yeah, so to get our Config Manager devices into a co-managed state, the identity is key here. So there's 3 stages when we talk about using Azure Active Directory. So we need to get our existing identity from Active Directory. We need to get the device identity into Azure AD. And then the second part is we need to do a hybrid join. So these existing devices, Windows 10 devices, we do a hybrid join into Azure Active Directory, and we're then in a state to be able to enroll the device into Intune, because that is the end goal, is enrolling our on-prem devices, Windows 10 devices, into Intune. You need Windows 10, 1709.
Yeah, so various permissions and roles required in order to achieve a co-management state. So with hybrid, with the hybrid join, you're going to need an Active Directory Domain Services Enterprise Admin account.
Yep.
That's in order to create what's called the service connection point. Also, it's a requirement for enabling co-management to have an SCCM full administrator with all roles in scope.
Yep. Spot on. You need Microsoft Intune, so you need to have had got an Intune license, signed into the Azure portal. And one of the key things with Intune is you need to make sure that the users are in scope for Windows enrollment. So if you're looking to set this up as a pilot, you can switch across to some and specify your group, or you can leave all users in scope. If you set it to none, you can't enroll the devices to Intune, and that makes this whole thing null and void. What else do we need? What's really key, Leon?
What's really key?
Do we need Config Manager?
Potentially.
That's a prerequisite.
Absolutely.
We do.
So, supported version of Config Manager. So co-management was first introduced in 1710. Really started to see some of the value of co-management within 1806.
Yep.
But ultimately, we would
Yeah.
probably recommend. Move on to the next slide.
1906 is where it's at. We saw some really cool improvements with auto-enrollment. We'll go through that in more detail later, but we can now enroll the devices using the Mistlorons, the device token, so we don't have to wait for the user to log into the device before the device is enrolled into Intune. So that would sometimes give us a bit of a faux pas status if we looked at the monitoring workspace for co-management, it would sometimes flag up saying we're waiting for the user to enroll. So that's one of the really cool features we can see in 1906. Some of the other really cool features is the ability to specify collections for workloads. So pre-1906, we had one pilot collection we could specify, and that was for all workloads. So in 1906, we can now specify a collection for each workload. So we have that granular moving of workloads across to Intune.
Absolutely. So really, Ben, in my mind, in my opinion, that if you're considering moving some of your workloads to Intune, then there's really no reason why not to go into a co-managed state and enable pilot workloads for all workloads.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you've got a different collection for each, and you can be really granular with your testing.
Absolutely. Co-management support for US government cloud as well there. It doesn't say US, but it's the US government cloud, same as CMG.
Okay, so we mentioned earlier on, we're going to be concentrating on pathway 1. So that's your hybrid Azure AD join devices first, which will then enroll into Intune to reach that co-management state.
Yep. We can get to lunch a bit quicker. We've got a lab we're going to run through now, and the lab is hybrid Azure AD join, and we're going to talk about using password hash sync method to hybrid join our devices into Azure AD. So can I see a show of hands of those who are not using AD Connect and hybrid join at the moment? Or are we all doing that? Would you want us to see that slide to run through the setup wizard? Or do you want lunch? But happy to go through it if you want afterwards.
So with the later versions of the Azure AD Connect wizard, it's really becoming easy. More and more simple. So.
So out of the box now, the latest client, 132, something like that.
Yeah.
When you run through the AD Connect wizard now, the default is to choose hybrid join with password hash synchronization. So your devices are going to join into Azure Active Directory. The other option for a managed hybrid join is pass-through authentication, sometimes known as PTA. So PTA, pass-through authentication, your devices are still going to authenticate against your on-premise Active Directory. So with password hash sync, your devices are going to authenticate with Azure AD, which is quite cool if you're in a disaster scenario and you've lost your on-premise infrastructure. You don't really want your devices trying to communicate back in. And that's a really easy DR strategy if you're using password hash sync. And it is the default option when you're setting up hybrid join. So we'll skip that lab. Skip the lab. We'll show this lab though.
Absolutely.
So the previous lab was going through installing AAD Connect and setting up hybrid Azure AD join. And so that's one of the prerequisites. And we can test that. We can download the Azure Active Directory PowerShell module. That's the right word. And we can use get msol device to see if our devices are registered with Azure Active Directory. We can go onto the client and use dsreg/cmd/status to look at the registration status of our client as well. So the first stage is getting the client hybrid Azure AD registered. And the next step is one of the prerequisites is we need to specify a client setting within ConfigMgr. So we're just going to talk through this. We just didn't trust the demo gods, so it's a pre-recorded lab, so we feel safe that way. So it's a client setting that you need to make sure that you've got enabled. So it's a cloud service. And automatically register new Windows 10 domain join devices with Azure Active Directory. We want that to be yes. You can set that via GPO, but we live in the ConfigMgr world, so we do it via ConfigMgr. And this is what I was talking about just a second ago using PowerShell. I think we'll skip this as well because we are going to get to lunch. So this lab was just talking you through firing a PowerShell window and just using a couple of commandlets to verify your device has been registered with Azure AD. These will be available, I think, these decks, so you can feel free to run through these in your own time as well. So we come to the next slide, and essentially our devices are hybrid joined because we've set the prerequisites, we've run through AD Connect, we've made sure the client setting is enabled, and the devices have hybrid Azure AD joined, we've verified that. So the next step when enabling code management is to, in my opinion, create the collections. So in 1906, we have different collections for different workloads that you can specify when we enable code management. So what we've done here is we've created a collection in ConfigMgr for each of those workloads. So we can selectively add clients to these collections, and then the workloads will move across seamlessly for those clients. So we've got a collection for each of the workloads available, and we've also got a collection we've created for Intune auto-enrollment, because ConfigMgr will automatically enroll your clients into Intune, and we'll come on to that in the next lab. So this lab is going to take us through the configuration of code management. Did you want to talk to this, Leon? Yeah. There you go. Go.
Okay, so just going to verify our collections are there and populated with clients. And as you can see, we've scoped our 2 test clients for auto-enrollment. Administration and then cloud services, and then right-click configure co-management, or are you going to use the ribbon? Yeah, use the ribbon bar. Absolutely. You like to do things a long way down. Okay, and there's the potential for adding US government cloud, new as of 1906. And this indeed is now where we'd need to log in with a global admin account. Okay. And you now need to select the option for automatic enrollment, either pilot or all devices.
Yes. So I'll just expand on that quick if I may.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So in my opinion, we wouldn't really want to be enabling all of our clients to enroll into Intune at that point. ConfigMgr does handle it really well. If you did set all of your clients to automatically enroll, then ConfigMgr does stagger the enrollment into Intune over a number of days if you've got over X thousand number of machines in your environment. But we would generally, this is a new feature we're enabling on our tenants, so we're going to go for a pilot collection to enroll into Intune.
Okay, yeah, so we'll select the pilot collection for auto enrollment. Now, if you just pause the video there, Ben. Okay, so we notice at the bottom of the screen there, there's a warning. Please ensure the proper prerequisites are installed. So if we had a CMG installed in our environment, that is where you would have the parameters, the command line parameters for installing the ConfigMgr agent, and then you would specify them if you were to deploy the ConfigMgr agent via Intune, and that's how it would connect to the CMG.
Yep. So those parameters would contain things like your CMG endpoint name and things like that, things Joey just went through previously.
Okay, so this is where we select our workloads. As you can see, you can select either pilot or Intune. And just illustrating here that you're unable to select pilot collections until you select a workload. So we're going to pick some workloads. Now, watch if you just pause there, please, Ben. Notice when we switch over the device configuration workload, it automatically switches over endpoint protection and resource access policies. So that's just something to bear in mind, okay? You can, however, independently enable endpoint protection or resource access without device configuration. It's just something to plan into your deployment.
Can you control 200
Yeah. Yeah, independently, yeah. It's just device configuration that takes over endpoint and resource access.
Yeah, so if you move device configuration, the code management capabilities include endpoint protection and resource access policies. They go with it. And as Leon said, you can leave device configuration purely config-man, so your CIs and your configuration is coming from config-man.
No, you can't, no. No, if device configuration is enabled, endpoint protection and resource access have to stay enabled. But if you used to move device configuration back, you could then enable endpoint protection or resource access independently. Not with device configuration.
So if you enable the device configuration, you don't want it?
No. No, it's a requirement that brings the workload across. Okay, so we've selected pilot for all of our workloads in this scenario, and this is where we will select our collections we created earlier. So again, as I mentioned earlier on, I can see the real value of the 1906 update for code management. Enables you to be a lot more granular with your testing. Okay. That's pretty.
That'd be
Absolutely,
really cool.
yeah. UV, yeah.
Really good
Absolutely.
suggestion.
So that's now creating the co-management config. Takes 30 seconds or so, and then pretty much that's about it.
Yep, that's it.
Time to go home. That's it, yeah.
So we can see that this it's been created in the background.
Yeah.
And
There we
that's
go.
it. So that literally is real time. That's how long it takes to set up code management. Pretty cool. So we don't want to go back a slide.
Take it away with the logs, Ben.
Yep. So in that previous lab, we had 2 Windows 10 machines in the Intune enrollment collection. So we're just going to pop across to those Windows 10 machines now. The code management handler.log is the one log file you're going to be really interested in. So what we can see here on the screen is the device is not enrolled into Intune at this point, so we haven't done a policy refresh. So the code management settings come down to the endpoint as a CI basically, so we have to do a policy refresh. And we should see, I know we'll see, because it's a pre-recorded lab.
Notice
so
the device is not MDM enrolled as well.
Yeah, I just pointed that out.
Yeah. Cool.
So MDM enrollment is succeeded. So that's cool. So no GPOs need to be set for enrollment into Intune. It's all handled by ConfigMan. And on the next slide, these videos don't like stopping, do they? Yeah. So this is just a snapshot of that log file. So we saw that the MD enrollment succeeded, and this is a feature of 1906. So the device enrolled with your Azure Active Directory device credentials. So the device enrollment can happen before the user logs in, which is really cool.
Saves a lot of alerts on the
It does.
monitoring console.
So we're just going to pop across to the Azure AD Blade and just see that our devices are hybrid Azure AD registered, as we did previously, but we missed that lab. So we're just going to come into Intune and just show that our devices have enrolled, and they've enrolled with the status showing that they're managed by MDM Intune and also the config manager agent. And because they're hybrid Azure AD joined machines, they automatically enroll as corporate devices, not personal devices. So we'll just mention this briefly. So because the devices are rolling into Intune with a device token, there's no user signed into the machine at this point. There might be, but there might not be. The enrollable user will get populated when the first user logs in who's got an Intune license. So until the user logs in, you may go into the Intune devices and you may see that blank, and it may say down here that none's window PC is being co-managed. As soon as the user logs in, the device ownership goes to that user. It's the user has to be licensed for Intune for that to populate. Yeah, just hybrid Azure AD join is a requirement for that to happen.
But also an interesting point to raise, and we talked about this and we need to test it, is what would happen if an unlicensed user signed into that device then? It's an interesting scenario.
Yeah, so
not tried it yet.
absolutely, and this is a workload we're going through in the lab. So say, for example, the device enrolls into Intune with the Azure Directory token. Will the workloads, if you've got workloads transitioned across to Intune, will they work? Or do they have to wait for a licensed user to log in? My gut feeling is you'd have to wait for a licensed Intune users to log in before those workloads would actually light up, but we haven't tested that. Does anybody know?
We'll let you know.
We'll test it in the lab. So very quickly.
Just before we move on, there's something I forgot to mention, Ben, which you found in your lab. So one thing we'd recommend, if you are using all of these different pilot collections, we'd recommend not to rely on that as a reporting method to understand what workloads are enabled on what clients, because you could be in a scenario, as I highlighted with the device configuration workload. Let's say you only wanted to enable device configuration. Have I said this right? Yes. You only added a device to the device configuration collection. Well, as we've seen, when them workloads flip, that device will also receive endpoint protection and resource access workloads, but the collection membership will not reflect that of that device as well. Does that make sense? I've explained that very badly. That makes sense, yeah. So just be aware of the behaviour of flipping that workload over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the end of these two labs, we'll just show you how you can look at it's called capabilities of code management. When you move workloads across, your agent is being assigned capabilities, and we'll show you how to see what those capabilities are in a bit more detail. So we're going to run through a couple of more quick labs. We're going to show you switching workloads across to Intune. So we're going to show you compliance policies switching across. So at the moment in our lab, as it stands, the compliance is set to ConfigMgr. So if you're using Intune today, you may see will hopefully see a compliant flag there, which means Intune MDM is managing the compliance. So we'll just show that workload switch over. Do you want to go through this? Do you want to talk through this, Leon?
We'll share the love.
Share the love.
Okay, so as we can see, compliance state at the moment is showing as ConfigMgr in the portal. So now we are going to add our client using the really, really old-fashioned method.
Yeah, he slated me for this.
To a device collection. Right-click, add resource. It's way easier. Yeah, in all seriousness, we're going to add the client to that collection.
PowerShell's easier.
Oh, absolutely. Adam would agree PowerShell is easier, wouldn't you, Adam?
There are two Windows 10 lab machines. We're just adding to that compliance collection for code management.
Okay. Mash the refresh button as hard as you can, just to make sure that collection membership is there, and there it is. Okay, so the next point is let's have a look at some logs. Logs don't lie. We all love logs. Which log is it, Ben? Co-management handler.
Code management handler. .log. This is where my lab paused. So I'm the demo gods, you know, my lab's frozen on me at that point. So they'll get you either way. So I'm just going to stop quickly there and just briefly mention what this is. So when we mentioned about seeing what workloads have been assigned to our client, so this is known as co-management capabilities. That's the buzzword. So with co-management enabled, we get a capability of 1, yeah? And as we move workloads across to Intune, that capability number changes, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this lab. So, policy refresh. So we've added the clients to a collection, and the collection says that compliance is now moved across to Intune. When we've done a policy refresh, we've received a new capabilities value of 3. Pause that. You going to pause it? Pause it, yeah. Touch. To you, to me?
Yeah, to you then.
So capabilities of 3, it's a co-management enabled is 1, compliance is capabilities 2, and the 2 added together. Well, I'll go into a bit more because it's not quite that straightforward when we start merging capabilities, but we'll have a look at those mathematics later. So I've just gone into client there just to show that within the ConfigMgr control panel applet, the capabilities number is displayed also. As soon as the ConfigMan client receives a capabilities change, it does an Intune sync. I think we see this in the logs. So it's instantaneous. It gets a new capability. It immediately fires off an Intune sync, and we can see.
As if by magic.
So this is real time. This wasn't me pausing the labs. It was literally seconds, and the workload had switched across. This is just me showing the same thing on the second client in the lab. Just pretty quick stuff. So there we go. MDM sync has been triggered. So we receive new capabilities, and it's an MDM sync happens straight away.
Again, that just highlights how Intune has been engineered to work with ConfigMgr in this scenario.
Yep. Just press refresh a few more times. This is where you start to panic, isn't it? You press refresh 4 times, and it hasn't appeared. There you go. So our other device is compliant. Now we have to caveat that compliance. So we would have to have created a compliance policy previously and assigned it to those users. And I'll just show you that we do have one. So this is something to bear in mind, actually. When you're moving workloads to Intune, just have that forethought, you know. If I'm moving compliance across to Intune, I'm going to need some compliance policies. Yeah, so just have a pre-thought.
Absolutely.
Before we start
just
moving
hold
stuff
fire there,
across.
because that's triggered my brain into a scenario that I was involved in, where all I'm going to say is when you flip the workload for client apps, if you've got any apps in Intune that are required to all users, and you flip the switch, them apps will deploy.
Yeah.
So just be careful with your pilot collections and your testing first.
Yeah, because that is an absolute, you know, scenario today where we have ConfigMan and we've dabbled with Intune and we're pushing some stuff down with Intune, and suddenly the two collide in the middle and the Red Sea parts, and suddenly you've got all the apps coming down from Intune. So absolutely be aware of your existing policies with Intune before you start moving these workloads across. Very, very valid point. So that was it. So that's switching workloads for compliance.
And looks like we've got time for apps.
Have you got 4 more minutes, guys? No? Oh,
Have
cool.
10? Yeah, sweet.
Do this. So. Yes. Yeah.
And you can delete the co-management settings as well. I only know because I had to do it in my lab. Yeah.
It won't undo what Intune's done. So, so if by moving the workload across, you've done Candy Crush Saga on the machine, it won't uninstall it if you move it back. But yes, you can certainly move it back. So the other workload transition we want to show you, which is pre-release, is switching workloads for client apps. Strictly speaking, this isn't switching workloads. Did you want to? I know you mentioned this earlier, Leon. Did you want to?
Well, yeah, like I say, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as the device is in scope for the client app's workload, so either it's within the pilot collection or you've solely switched the authority to Intune, client apps are available within for deployment via Intune to the company portal, but also they are still available for deployment via ConfigMgr to the software center. So it's both. Without this workload switched, it's one, it's just ConfigMgr.
Yeah.
With the switch moved over, it's both.
Yep. So today, this is what you'd see before you switch the workload to Intune. If you went into the company portal, if you had the company portal app installed on your Windows 10 device, you would get that notification to tell you to go to the software center to get your software. Line of business and Win32 apps from Intune. So anything you can deploy from Intune to the company portal is valid here.
That's correct, yeah.
Absolutely. That forethought is fundamental
Needs planning.
to switching workloads.
So I've absolutely been in this scenario with a customer without sort of going into too much detail, yeah. And it could have caused a major issue.
So is that the only workload that the end result can use both ConfigMgr and Intune?
Yes, that's correct.
Caveated, yes. So there are some CIs that you can still force to come from ConfigMan. So if you move the device configuration workload over, you can explicitly make some CIs still applicable from ConfigMan at that point as well.
You have to specify it in the baseline deployment, I believe.
Yep.
Is that right? But other than that, yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Generally, when you're switching workloads, you have to implement a policy.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So in this quick run through, the company portal is pre-installed on our Windows 10 device. So we just pop in there and we can see. We have to go to Software Center to get our apps. We can't get them from Intune until we flip that workload. Not on a Windows 10 device, no. The apps come from Software Center. Sorry, yeah.
Go on.
Have you paused it?
Yeah, I've paused it.
So can we put in?
The apps, the company portal, if you've just got SCCM, app usage.
Yes. So do we have to use SCCM? Can we put SCCM apps into the company portal? Yeah, no. So SCCM apps still come from SCCM, still deployed. Absolutely. Yeah, well framed, it's an Intune feature, so only Intune apps will appear in the company portal. Thank you.
Click in there, mate, it should go. See, it's going.
Are we going or are we stopped? Let's go. This is just a couple of minutes, this won't take long. So we're just showing existing capabilities.
3, which is compliance.
Co-management enabled and compliance is 3. We're going to add our workstations into the client apps collection.
Ooh, is he doing it the new school way or
Don't
the old
rib
school
me,
way?
mate, that's the textbook way of adding clients to collections. Who does add resource?
Me.
Everybody puts a hand up. Dull.
The PowerShell requirements to enable the workloads to be updated. So we're very restricted in 1810.
To be honest, I love PowerShell, but I haven't played with the commandlets yet for code management, so I don't know.
Good question. I'll find out.
It's a cool question.
Yeah, you can definitely enable the policies successfully. It would be really good to kind of have all the commandlets ready to enable all the workloads as well.
Yeah. So please look in the log file. Code management handler.log file is telling you everything that's going on. So don't sit there second guessing what's happening. So we'll see in here our capabilities is going to change from 3 to 67. So 67 is code management enabled 1 with, we've got compliance, workload moved across, which is 2, and then client apps capabilities is 65. So 65, add 2, add 1. No, it's not, 64. 64, add 2, add 1. I'll get confused. If you want to talk to me about capability numbers and the way that we work them out, it needs 5 cups of coffee.
You've done a good blog post
But
on it.
I'm really happy to go through it because, sadly, it excites me. So we've moved the workload across. We've seen the capabilities change. This does require a company portal restart. If your company portal is open, you will need to reopen it. You can see we've deployed Bingo from Intune. So before, if we went into the company portal, it told us we had to go to Software Center for our apps. Now we've switched the workload across to Intune. We can get apps from Intune, company portal, and still from the Software Center. And just to prove that, a little feature Pete mentioned earlier, in 1906 we can now right-hand click the device and install application. So I just want to show you that we can still push applications out via Software Center, which is still a very valid, very powerful way of deploying applications. Then we're just going to open appenforce.log file, show you the installation, clicking off of that. So that's the one example of when you switch the workloads across, they're both working in harmony, Software Center and the company portal. But again, another very valid thing that I was speaking to Phil with in the break is as you're switching workloads across and you may be moving your client application deployments from Configuration Manager, where you've maybe spent a lot of time and investment in your delivery optimization and peer-to-peering, you've got things working really tightly and neatly, and then you suddenly move your workloads across to Intune. Again, that forethought. How is that going to impact your network if you're suddenly delivering all of your client apps from Intune? Yes, it's just something to think about. Very briefly, in the monitoring workspace, there's a code management dashboard, which is really cool. Go and have a look at that. Tells you what's going on. So other monitoring, how do we monitor code management? We can do it from the workspace. Those who like SQL, there is a SQL view, Vienna School Client Code Management State in the database. That will show you all of the capabilities and code management state of your code managed enabled clients. Client side, you can dip into the registry to have a look at the capabilities or look in the code management handler log file. I'm not going to go through what the capabilities are. Please come and speak to me about that, because that's really cool stuff. The different numbers and how they're worked out. Any of the documentation we've used in the labs today for prereqs for setting up things can be found there. Cody is such a clever guy. He's got a degree in maths. He's done a PowerShell script that will, if you put the number in, it will show you what the workloads are. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that. That's us. Lunch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.